London, 1855. The annual Whittington Ball marked the height of the London season, when matches were made and fortunes secured. From her shadowed alcove, Winifred Grantham observed the glittering crowd with a detached air that had become her armor over the years. The chandeliers cast a golden glow across the ballroom, illuminating the silk gowns and jewels that adorned the young debutantes as they twirled with their suitors. She adjusted her spectacles and smoothed her modest grey dress, devoid of the fashionable frills and expansive crinolines that dominated the room. "Miss Grantham, you've positioned yourself precisely where no one might notice you again," came the familiar voice of her friend, Lady Eleanor Pennington. "How shall you secure a husband if you insist on blending into the wallpaper?" Winifred offered a small smile. "I've no illusions about my prospects, Eleanor. Plain governesses of 8 and 20 do not inspire romantic notions in eligible gentlemen." She gestured discreetly toward her unadorned features, the chestnut hair pulled severely back, the unremarkable grey eyes behind unflattering spectacles. "Nonsense," Eleanor replied, though her eyes betrayed her agreement. "You possess a fine mind and gentle disposition. Qualities men seek in their sisters, not their wives," Winifred replied without self-pity. "Besides, I've quite made peace with my situation. The Morton children need me, and Lady Morton provides security few governesses enjoy." The truth Winifred would never voice aloud was that she had long ago accepted the whispers that followed her through society's edges, too plain for passion, too bookish for courtship, too quiet for notice. Her parents' deaths had left her with no dowry and no connections beyond the charity of distant relations who had secured her position in the Morton household. She had built her life around the certainty that love would never be hers to claim. "Lord Whitmore has just arrived with the Earl of Ivington," Eleanor whispered, her attention suddenly diverted to the entrance. "Every mother in London has set her cap at the Earl since his return from the Continent." Winifred allowed herself to glance toward the door, where two gentlemen had indeed entered. Lord Whitmore she recognized from previous social gatherings, a portly, genial man of middle years. But the tall figure beside him commanded the room's attention in a way that made even Winifred pause. The Earl of Ivington stood with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to privilege. His evening attire, impeccably tailored to broad shoulders, spoke of wealth worn with unconscious grace. But it was his expression, stern, assessing, and somehow world-weary, that drew Winifred's gaze longer than she intended. His features were not classically handsome but striking, a strong jaw, piercing eyes beneath dark brows, and a mouth that appeared unaccustomed to smiling. "Isaiah Osborne, the 8th Earl of Ivington," Eleanor continued, clearly savouring the gossip. 33, unmarried, and master of one of England's greatest fortunes. They say he's returned to find a bride, though he seems to approach the task as one might a business merger. "How romantic," Winifred remarked dryly, returning her attention to her punch. "I'm certain the ladies will cue accordingly." "You jest, but his fortune would tempt even the most romantic heart. 12,000 a year, Ivington Park in Sussex, the London townhouse, properties in Bath, and presumably in need of an ornament to grace them all," Winifred finished. "I dare say he'll find no shortage of candidates." Eleanor was soon claimed for a dance, leaving Winifred to her observations. She watched as the Earl was introduced to one debutante after another, his responses polite but detached. Unlike most eligible gentlemen, he seemed unimpressed by beauty, unmoved by flirtation. She found herself curiously studying him from behind her fan, wondering what manner of man could remain so aloof amid such determined pursuit. It was near midnight when Winifred's quiet evening was disrupted. Lady Morton approached, her youngest daughter's hand clasped firmly in her own. "Miss Grantham, young Catherine has taken ill, too many sweets, I suspect. I must remain for appearances, but would you be so kind as to accompany her home? The carriage will return for us afterward." Winifred immediately rose. "Of course, my lady." The child did indeed look pale, and Winifred gathered her wrap and reticule, leading Catherine through a side door to avoid disturbing the gathering. The night air was cool after the stuffiness of the ballroom, and she breathed deeply as they waited for the Morton carriage to be brought around. "Miss Grantham." The deep voice startled her. Turning, she found the Earl of Ivington standing nearby, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. "My lord," she replied with a curtsy, wondering what business he could possibly have with her. "I believe you dropped this." He extended his hand, upon which rested her small notebook, the one in which she recorded observations, snippets of poetry, and sketches when the Morton children were at their lessons. "Oh, thank you, sir. I hadn't realized." She accepted it with embarrassment, tucking it securely into her reticule. Had he looked inside? The thought made her cheeks warm. "You're departing early?" He remained where he stood, apparently in no hurry to return to the ball. "Yes, my lord. Miss Catherine is unwell." She gestured to the child, who curtsied dutifully despite her discomfort. His gaze softened slightly as he nodded to the girl. "I hope you recover swiftly, Miss Catherine." Before more could be said, the Morton carriage arrived, and Winifred helped Catherine inside. As they pulled away, she glanced back to find the Earl still watching them, his tall figure outlined against the bright windows of the Whittington mansion. "Is he a prince?" Catherine asked sleepily. Winifred smiled. "No, merely an earl. Now close your eyes, and we'll have you home and tucked up in bed before you know it." She expected that would be the end of her interaction with the Earl of Ivington. Such men did not notice women like Winifred Grantham twice. 3 days later, Winifred sat in the small garden behind the Morton townhouse, supervising the children's drawing lesson while attempting to finish a letter to her former teacher, Miss Blackwell. The spring sunshine was pleasant, and she had allowed the children to move their easels outdoors to capture the blooming roses. "Miss Grantham." The butler appeared at the garden door. "You have a visitor in the drawing room." "A visitor? For me?" Winifred frowned. She received few personal callers. "Who is it, Phillips?" "The Earl of Ivington, miss." The pencil slipped from her fingers. There must be some mistake. Perhaps he's calling on Lady Morton. "Her ladyship is out, miss. He asked specifically for you." Bewildered, Winifred instructed the older Morton daughter to watch her siblings, then followed Phillips into the house. She checked her appearance in the hall mirror. Her simple blue muslin day dress was respectable but hardly fashionable, her hair arranged in its usual practical knot. What business could an earl possibly have with her? The earl stood by the window when she entered, his tall frame silhouetted against the light. He turned immediately, bowing with formal correctness. "Miss Grantham. Thank you for receiving me." "My lord, this is unexpected." She curtsied, maintaining a proper distance. "How may I assist you?" He seemed momentarily at a loss, unusual for a man of his standing. "I wish to return something to you." From his coat, he produced a folded paper. "A page from your notebook that must have come loose. I found it after our encounter." Winifred accepted the paper, recognizing one of her sketches, a charcoal rendering of an old man she had observed in the park, his weathered face capturing a lifetime of stories. Mortification swept through her. "You've gone to considerable trouble, my lord." A note would have sufficed. "Perhaps." He paused, studying her with unsettling directness. "Your drawing shows remarkable talent." "You're too kind. It's merely a pastime." "Do you often sketch strangers without their knowledge, Miss Grantham?" The question held no accusation, only curiosity, yet Winifred felt her cheeks warm. I find faces fascinating, particularly those society overlooks. The elderly, the working poor, children. They wear their stories openly, unlike the aristocracy. His mouth curved slightly. Who are taught from infancy to conceal genuine emotion behind pleasant facades. I wouldn't presume to make such an observation, my lord. Yet you would be correct in doing so. He moved away from the window, his gaze falling on the modest bookshelf in the corner. You've read Wordsworth, I presume? The shift in conversation startled her. Yes, of course. The best portion of a good man's life, his little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and love, he quoted, surprising her further. I saw that written in your notebook as well. Winifred's embarrassment deepened. You must think me terribly sentimental. On the contrary. I find your perspective refreshing. He turned back to her, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. Miss Grantham, would you permit me to commission a portrait? A portrait? She blinked in confusion. I fear you overestimate my abilities, my lord. I am no professional artist. Not of myself, he clarified. My grandmother. She celebrates her 80th birthday next month, and I found the professional portraitists all render her with such artifice. They soften her features, remove the character age has given her. Your sketches capture dignity without vanity. Winifred was speechless. Of all the reasons she might have imagined for his visit, this had never occurred to her. I don't know what to say, my lord. Say yes. You would be generously compensated, of course. It isn't a matter of compensation, she replied quickly. It's highly unusual for a governess to accept commissions. Lady Morton might object, I've already spoken with Lady Morton. She has no objection, provided it doesn't interfere with your duties. Winifred stared at him, trying to comprehend why an earl would go to such lengths to secure a drawing from a governess he'd met only once. May I ask why you're so determined in this matter, my lord? For the first time, he seemed slightly discomfited. My grandmother is difficult to please. She has rejected 3 professional portraits already. I believe your style might satisfy her. There was more to it than that, Winifred suspected, but she couldn't divine his true motives. Still, the opportunity intrigued her. Very well, my lord. I accept, though I can make no guarantees your grandmother will be pleased with the result. Excellent. His expression remained impassive, but she thought she detected a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. She resides with me at Berkeley Square. Would Saturday afternoon be convenient? The Morton children visit their aunt then, I believe. The fact that he knew this detail of her schedule was curious, but Winifred merely nodded. Saturday would be suitable. Until then, Miss Grantham. He bowed and departed, leaving Winifred standing in the drawing-room, the sketch still clutched in her hand, wondering what had truly prompted the Earl of Ivington to seek out a plain governess for such an unusual request. He's commissioned you to draw his grandmother, Eleanor exclaimed when Winifred confided in her the next day during their weekly walk in the park. Win, do you not see what this means? That he genuinely believes I can capture his grandmother's likeness. Winifred suggested dryly. Eleanor swatted her arm with her parasol. Don't be obtuse. No gentleman of his standing seeks out a governess for an artistic commission without an ulterior motive. He's interested in you. Nonsense. Winifred adjusted her bonnet against the spring breeze. Men like the Earl of Ivington do not notice women like me, Eleanor. If there's an ulterior motive, it's not romantic interest. Then what? "I haven't the faintest idea," Winifred admitted. "Perhaps he truly does appreciate my artistic style. Though that seems equally improbable. You undervalue yourself, Win. You always have." Eleanor's expression grew serious. "Ever since that dreadful business with Mr. Palmer when you were 20. Winifred stiffened. "Please don't mention that name. It's been 8 years. What he did was make abundantly clear that men do not fall in love with plain, penniless girls, regardless of what pretty lies they might tell." Winifred's tone was sharper than she intended. "Mr. Palmer taught me a valuable lesson that has spared me considerable heartache since." Eleanor sighed. "One fortune hunter's cruel deception doesn't define all men, Win. And you weren't always so convinced of your plainness. Before him, you never spoke of yourself this way." It was true, though Winifred was reluctant to admit it. Before Thomas Palmer had courted her for the inheritance he believed she would receive, before he had laughed in her face upon discovering her penniless state and declared her too plain to love for anything but money, she had been a different woman. More trusting. More hopeful. "Ancient history," Winifred said firmly. "And entirely irrelevant to the Earl of Ivington's commission, which I'm certain is precisely what he claims it to be." Eleanor looked unconvinced but mercifully changed the subject. Yet her words lingered in Winifred's mind as Saturday approached, planting an unwelcome seed of what might have been hope, had she not so thoroughly trained herself against such dangerous feelings. The Ivington townhouse on Berkeley Square was exactly as imposing as Winifred had imagined. A liveried footman admitted her, treating her with the polite deference normally reserved for guests rather than servants, an unusual circumstance that she attributed to the nature of her visit. She was shown to a bright morning room where an elderly woman sat regally in a wingback chair. Despite her advanced years, the Dowager Countess of Ivington possessed a straight back and keen eyes that assessed Winifred immediately. "So you're the girl Isaiah insists can capture my true likeness," she declared without preamble. "Come closer, child. My eyesight isn't what it was." Winifred approached and curtsied. "It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance, my lady." "We shall see about that," the Dowager replied, though her tone held more amusement than censure. "Most people find me insufferable within the first quarter hour. My grandson is one of the few exceptions, which I attribute to his own stubborn nature rather than any softness of character. Grandmother, please don't frighten Miss Grantham before she's even opened her sketchbook." The Earl entered from a side door, a wry expression briefly crossing his features. "She might yet escape if you give her cause." "Nonsense. The girl has more backbone than that, I can tell." The Dowager gestured to a chair positioned near the window. "You'll sit there, Miss Grantham. The light is best, and you can see all my wrinkles and imperfections clearly." "It's the imperfections that give a face its character, my lady," Winifred replied honestly as she arranged her materials. The Dowager's eyebrows rose slightly. "Well said. Now, Isaiah, pour us some tea while Miss Grantham prepares. And do try not to hover so. It's most distracting." To Winifred's surprise, the Earl complied without protest, serving tea with the same efficiency he might bring to a business transaction. As she began preliminary sketches, capturing the basic proportions of the Dowager's face, Winifred became aware of his presence behind her chair, observing her work. "You begin with the eyes," he noted quietly. "They're the true windows to character," she replied, concentrating on the paper. "If I can capture them correctly, the rest of the face follows naturally." The Dowager snorted. "My eyes have seen 80 years of folly and triumph, girl. Can your pencil capture that?" "I can only try, my lady." For the next hour, Winifred worked steadily, occasionally engaging in conversation with the Dowager, who proved to be a font of sharp observations and surprising candor. The Earl remained in the room, sometimes participating in the conversation, sometimes silently watching Winifred's hands as they moved across the paper. "Tell me, Miss Grantham," the dowager said eventually, "what made you become a governess? You clearly have artistic talent." "Necessity, my lady. My parents died when I was 20, leaving me without means. I was fortunate that my education allowed me to secure a respectable position. No relatives to take you in. None who could afford another mouth to feed." Winifred kept her tone matter-of-fact, unwilling to invite pity. "And no suitors." The dowager's directness was startling. "Grandmother," the Earl warned, but the old woman waved him off. "I'm merely curious. A woman doesn't typically choose to be a governess if other options are available." Winifred's pencil paused momentarily. "I had one suitor, briefly. He proved insincere in his attentions." "Ah." The dowager nodded sagely. "A fortune hunter who discovered there was no fortune to hunt." Winifred's head snapped up in surprise. "How did you know?" "I wasn't born yesterday, child. It's a common enough tale." The old woman's eyes held unexpected compassion. "And I suppose this experience convinced you of some nonsense about your own worth." Uncomfortably aware of the Earl's presence, Winifred returned her attention to her sketch. "It provided clarity, my lady. I harbor no illusions about my prospects." Clarity and illusions are often two sides of the same counterfeit coin, the dowager remarked cryptically. "Isaiah, ring for more tea. Miss Grantham's cup has gone cold." The afternoon continued in this vein, the dowager alternating between sharp questions and insightful observations, while the Earl remained a quiet presence that Winifred found increasingly difficult to ignore. His eyes, she realized when she chanced to meet them, were a striking shade of grey, not cold as she had first thought, but intensely observant, missing nothing. When the light began to fade, Winifred set down her materials. "I believe I have enough for today, my lady. With your permission, I'll complete the portrait at home and return next week for any adjustments you might wish." The dowager nodded. "Show me what you have thus far." With some trepidation, Winifred turned her sketchbook around. She had captured the dowager in charcoal and pencil, the imperious tilt of her head, the deep lines that mapped her face, but also the intelligence in her eyes and the suggestion of humor in the set of her mouth. It was honest but dignified, the face of a woman who had lived fully and unapologetically. There was a moment of silence as the dowager studied the drawing. Then she nodded once. "You've seen me, Miss Grantham." "Not many do." Coming from such a woman, it was high praise indeed. Winifred felt a flush of pleasure. "Thank you, my lady. Isaiah will see you home," the dowager announced, rising with the aid of her cane. "Oh, that's not necessary," Winifred began. "It's growing dark, Miss Grantham," the Earl interrupted quietly. "Please allow me to ensure your safe return." His tone brooked no argument, and Winifred found herself in his carriage minutes later, acutely conscious of his presence opposite her. The enclosed space seemed to intensify his presence, the subtle scent of sandalwood and leather, the breadth of his shoulders, the controlled power in his movements. "Your grandmother is remarkable," she said, breaking the silence. "Yes." His mouth curved slightly. "Formidable would be another appropriate description. She reminds me of an oak tree, deeply rooted, unbending in the face of storms." He regarded her with interest. "Most people compare her to a battle axe." "Most people lack imagination," Winifred replied without thinking, then colored at her own impertinence. To her surprise, the Earl laughed, a rich, genuine sound that transformed his austere features. "Indeed they do, Miss Grantham. Indeed they do." The carriage arrived at the Morton residence too quickly. As the footman opened the door, the Earl spoke again. "Would you be available to continue next Saturday?" "Yes, my lord." "Good." He hesitated, then added, "My grandmother enjoys your company. She has few female companions who speak to her plainly." Winifred doubted the formidable dowager needed company, but she merely nodded. "Until Saturday, then." As the carriage pulled away, she wondered why the Earl of Ivington's approval should matter to her at all, and why, despite all her carefully constructed defenses, she found herself looking forward to their next meeting with unwise anticipation. The following Saturday established a pattern that continued for 3 weeks. Winifred would arrive at Berkeley Square, spend several hours sketching and conversing with the dowager while the Earl came and went, and then he would personally see her home in his carriage. Each session revealed more of the dowager's extraordinary life, her marriage at 18 to a man 20 years her senior, her travels through Europe, her fierce protection of her family's legacy. But it was the Earl himself who increasingly occupied Winifred's thoughts. Unlike most aristocratic men of her acquaintance, he listened more than he spoke, observed more than he pronounced. He treated servants with quiet respect rather than condescension. And when he did offer an opinion, it was thoughtful and often surprising, revealing a mind that valued substance over appearance, truth over convenience. By the 4th Saturday, the portrait was nearly complete. Winifred had rendered the dowager in oils on canvas, a medium she rarely used due to the expense, but which the Earl had insisted upon, providing the finest materials. The result was striking, the dowager seated in her chair, dressed in deep purple, her silver hair arranged simply, her expression one of dignified wisdom with a hint of challenge in her eyes. "It's magnificent," the dowager declared when Winifred revealed the finished work. "You've made me look my age without making me look decrepit. The others all tried to flatter me into some insipid grandmother from a children's book." "I merely painted what I saw, my lady," Winifred replied honestly. "Which is precisely why it succeeds where the others failed." The old woman turned to her grandson. "Isaiah, take Miss Grantham to see the gallery while I rest. My old bones need a respite after sitting so long." It was clearly a dismissal, though Winifred suspected the dowager was hardier than she pretended. Still, she found herself following the Earl through the grand house to a long gallery lined with family portraits dating back centuries. "You come from a formidable lineage, my lord," Winifred observed as they walked slowly past stern-faced ancestors in elaborate frames. "Formidable, yes. Happy? That's a more complex question." He stopped before a portrait of a severe-looking man with the same grey eyes as his own. "My father, the 7th Earl. He died 5 years ago." "You resemble him," she noted. "In appearance only, I hope." His tone suggested a complicated relationship. He was a man who valued bloodlines and titles above character. "My mother died when I was 12, and afterward, he became rigid in his expectations." "Is that why you delayed marriage?" The question was presumptuous, but something about their weeks of acquaintance emboldened her. He glanced at her with surprise. "Perceptive, Miss Grantham." "Yes, in part. My father had arranged a match with the daughter of a duke, a political alliance, nothing more. I refused. That must have caused quite the scandal. It was the first time I directly defied him." His expression grew distant. "He threatened to disinherit me, though the entail made that impossible for the primary estates. We barely spoke for the last 3 years of his life." "I'm sorry," Winifred said quietly. "Don't be. It taught me the value of making my own choices." They continued walking, and he added, "My grandmother was the only one who supported me. She understood what it meant to marry without affection." They reached the end of the gallery, where a set of French doors opened onto a small private garden. Without asking permission, the Earl led her outside into the late afternoon sunshine. "Your grandmother married for duty, then?" Winifred asked as they followed a gravel path between spring flowers. "Yes. Though she says she grew to love my grandfather eventually, after she'd broken his heart enough times to make him worthy of her," he added with a hint of amusement. "She would say that." Winifred smiled. "She doesn't tolerate weakness in others or herself." "No. But she admires honesty above all else." He paused, turning to face her directly. "As do I, Miss Grantham." Something in his tone made Winifred's heart beat faster. "My lord? I have not been entirely honest with you about my reasons for commissioning the portrait." Winifred stiffened, suddenly reminded of her vulnerability, alone with a powerful man whose motives she couldn't fathom. "I don't understand. The portrait was genuine. My grandmother did reject those other artists. But my interest—" He hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "My interest extends beyond your artistic talents." Alarm and confusion warred within her. "Lord Ivington, if you're suggesting some improper arrangement, good God, no." He looked genuinely shocked. "Miss Grantham, Winifred, I would never dishonor you in such a way." The use of her given name startled her into silence. "I've expressed myself poorly," he continued, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that humanized him suddenly. "What I mean to say is that I arranged the commission because I wished to know you better. From our first meeting, I found myself intrigued." "Intrigued," she repeated flatly, disbelief evident in her tone. "My lord, I may be a governess, but I am not naive. Men of your station do not become intrigued by plain women without fortune or connections." His expression hardened slightly. "Is that what you truly think of me? That I'm so shallow?" "I think you're a man," she replied with unexpected bitterness. "And experience has taught me that men see women as either ornaments or conveniences." "Not all men, Winifred." "In my experience, yes, all men." She stepped back, needing distance. "Why else would you orchestrate this elaborate charade rather than simply calling on me properly? Was it a game? A challenge to see if the plain governess might be flattered by an earl's attention?" His jaw tightened. "You misjudge me severely." "Do I? Then explain yourself, my lord." For a moment, he said nothing, his expression inscrutable. "Then, I called on you properly first, if you recall. But I saw how you received me, with suspicion and disbelief. I recognized the walls you've built. They are not so different from my own." This gave her pause. "The portrait gave me reason to see you regularly without causing gossip," he continued more quietly. "To know you beyond the limitations of formal social interaction. Was that deceptive? Perhaps. But my interest is I genuine." Winifred struggled to process his words. They seemed impossible, contradicting everything she had come to believe about herself and men like him. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why me? There are countless beautiful, accomplished women of your own class who would, because you see truly," he interrupted. "You look at my grandmother and capture her essence, not merely her appearance. You speak honestly rather than saying what you believe others wish to hear. You observe the world with compassion and insight." He took a step closer. "And because when I am with you, I feel seen. Not as the Earl of Ivington, but as Isaiah Osborne." His sincerity was disarming, but Winifred's defenses had been carefully constructed over 8 years. "Pretty words, my lord. But society would never accept such an unequal match, even if I were inclined to believe you." "Society," he said with unexpected vehemence, "has never dictated my choices, and I don't intend to let it start now." Before she could respond, the housekeeper appeared at the garden door. "My lord, the Dowager is asking for Miss Grantham. She wishes to discuss the framing of the portrait." The interruption broke the tension between them. "We'll be right there, Mrs. Finch," the Earl replied, his expression once again composed. Winifred seized the opportunity to retreat behind her own carefully maintained facade. "We should not keep your grandmother waiting, my lord." He studied her for a moment, then nodded curtly. "This conversation isn't finished, Miss Grantham." But to Winifred, it had to be. The alternative was too dangerous to contemplate. "He's in love with you," the Dowager announced bluntly when Winifred entered her sitting room. Winifred froze, aware of the Earl entering behind her. "My lady, don't look so scandalized, girl. I'm old enough to speak plainly." The Dowager waved a hand dismissively. "Isaiah, pour us some sherry. Miss Grantham looks like she might faint." "Grandmother," the Earl said warningly, but complied. Winifred remained standing, too agitated to sit. "Lady Ivington, I think there has been a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," the old woman replied tartly, "is your belief that you're unworthy of my grandson's attention. Sit down, Miss Grantham. You're making my neck ache." Reluctantly, Winifred sank into a chair, accepting the small glass of sherry the Earl handed her with a barely steady hand. "Now then," the Dowager continued, "let's dispense with this nonsense. Isaiah has not shown interest in any woman since that dreadful business with Lady Caroline 5 years ago." "Grandmother, please," the Earl interrupted, a flush of anger or embarrassment coloring his cheeks. "And then he sees you at the Whittington ball, returns your dropped notebook, and suddenly commissions a portrait of me." The Dowager snorted. "I wasn't born yesterday." Winifred looked between them, bewildered. "Lady Caroline." The Earl's expression tightened. "A matter long in the past." "Hardly," the Dowager countered. "The woman betrayed you quite thoroughly, and you've kept every woman at arm's length since." "Until now." She fixed her sharp gaze on Winifred. "So you see, Miss Grantham, you are not the only one with reasons to distrust." Understanding dawned. "She hurt you," Winifred said quietly to the Earl. His jaw flexed. "She married my cousin for his title while we were still unofficially engaged." It was instructive. In that moment, Winifred saw something unexpected, a reflection of her own pain in his eyes, quickly masked but unmistakable. The mighty Earl had been wounded too, had learned to guard himself against false affection. "So you see," the Dowager said, more gently now, "when two people have been burned by false love, they may recognize something genuine in each other. Something worth the risk of pain." Winifred's defenses wavered. "My lady, even if what you suggest were true, the realities of our positions, damn society's expectations," the Dowager interrupted forcefully. "I married for duty and spent 40 years in a respectable but loveless marriage. I would not wish that on my grandson, or on you." The Earl moved to stand beside his grandmother's chair, placing a hand on her shoulder. "What my grandmother is trying to say, in her characteristically blunt manner, is that she approves of you, Winifred." The use of her given name again sent a tremor through her. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll consider it," he replied simply. "That you won't dismiss the possibility before it has a chance to flower." The earnestness in his expression undid her. I need time to think." "Of course." He nodded. "May I call on you properly tomorrow?" "At the Morton residence." The idea of the Earl of Ivington formally calling on a governess seemed absurd, yet his expression held no trace of jest. Winifred found herself nodding. "Yes. Though I cannot promise my answer will change." I don't ask for promises, only opportunity. He bowed slightly. Now, shall we discuss the framing of my grandmother's portrait? The conversation turned to safer topics, but Winifred's mind whirled with confusion, disbelief, and a dangerous, fragile hope that she had thought long extinguished. Eleanor was ecstatic when Winifred confided in her the next morning. "I knew it. Didn't I tell you he was interested?" "Oh, Win, this is like something from a novel." "It's madness," Winifred countered, pacing the small sitting room of Eleanor's home. "Even if he truly cares for me, which seems impossible, what kind of future could we have? The scandal would be enormous." "Scandal fades," Eleanor replied pragmatically. "And he's wealthy and powerful enough to weather it. The question is whether you care for him." Winifred paused her pacing. "How can I know? In the space of a day, everything I believed about myself, about him, has been upended." "Do you enjoy his company?" "Yes," Winifred admitted. "He's thoughtful, intelligent, surprisingly kind beneath that stern exterior." "Does your heart beat faster when he enters a room?" A blush answered for her. "And can you imagine your life without ever seeing him again?" The thought created an unexpected pang in Winifred's chest. "That's not fair, Eleanor. Physical attraction and engaging conversation don't constitute a foundation for marriage." "No, but they're a beginning." Eleanor took her hands. "Win, listen to me. 8 years ago, you let Thomas Palmer convince you that you were unlovable. You've worn that belief like armor ever since, keeping everyone at a distance. What if this is your chance to discover he was wrong?" Tears pricked at Winifred's eyes. "And what if the Earl realizes his mistake? What if, once the novelty wears off, he sees me as everyone else does, plain, unremarkable, not enough? Is that truly how everyone sees you? Or is it how you've taught yourself to see yourself?" Eleanor squeezed her hands. "The Winifred I knew before Thomas Palmer saw herself clearly, as intelligent, talented, and worthy of love. Perhaps it's time to reclaim that woman." Winifred swallowed hard. "I'm afraid, Eleanor." "Of course you are. Love is terrifying." Eleanor smiled gently. "But regret is worse." When Winifred returned to the Morton house, she was still uncertain, her mind and heart at war. She went through her duties mechanically, helping the children with their lessons while inwardly debating what she would say to the Earl when he called. At precisely 4 o'clock, Phillips announced him. Lady Morton, who had been stunned into unusual silence by the news that the Earl of Ivington wished to call on her governess, hovered nearby with poorly disguised curiosity. He entered the drawing-room looking as imposing as ever in a perfectly tailored coat, but Winifred noticed a tension in his shoulders that suggested he was not as composed as he appeared. "Miss Grantham," he greeted her formally, bowing. "Lord Ivington." She curtsied, acutely aware of Lady Morton watching from the doorway. With a significant glance at her employer, Winifred added, "Perhaps we might speak in the garden, my lord? The afternoon is pleasant." He assented immediately, offering his arm with a gravity that spoke volumes. Winifred placed her hand on his sleeve, feeling the solid strength beneath the fine wool, and led him through the French doors to the small garden where the Morton children often played. Once they were beyond earshot of the house, she spoke first. "You've caused quite a stir, my lord." Lady Morton is beside herself with confusion. "Let her be confused," he replied bluntly. "My business is with you, not her." Winifred steeled herself. "My lord Isaiah," he corrected quietly. "Please, when we are alone, I would hear my name from your lips." The intimacy of the request made her breath catch. "Isaiah," she conceded. "I've thought about what you said yesterday. About your interest in me. And his eyes, she noticed, held a vulnerability that belied his commanding presence. I still don't understand it, she admitted. I'm not being self-deprecating when I say we come from different worlds. I have nothing to offer that would benefit you, and no connections, no fortune, no particular beauty. You're wrong. His voice was low, intense. You offer precisely what I need most. And what is that? Truth. Clarity. The courage to see the world as it is, not as convention dictates it should be. He took a step closer. Do you know how rare that is in my circle? How suffocating the endless social games become? Winifred held her ground, though her pulse quickened. So I'm a refreshing novelty? A temporary escape from aristocratic expectations? No. His expression hardened. You undervalue yourself again, and in doing so, you insult my judgment. The rebuke startled her. I didn't mean you did. He wasn't angry, merely certain. You believe yourself unworthy of genuine affection because one selfish man told you so when you were young and vulnerable. You've allowed his cruelty to define you ever since. His perception cut too close to the bone. And you, she countered, suddenly defensive. Your grandmother mentioned Lady Caroline. Have you not also allowed past betrayal to shape your expectations? Yes, he acknowledged readily. Until I met you. The simple statement disarmed her completely. Winifred, he continued, his voice softening, I don't pretend this would be easy. Society will talk. Some doors may close. But consider what we might build together, a life based on mutual respect and genuine affection, not social convenience. You make it sound so simple, she whispered. It isn't simple. But it could be worth the complexity. He hesitated, then reached for her hand. When she didn't pull away, he held it gently between both of his. I'm not asking for an answer today. I'm asking for a chance to court you properly. To prove that what I feel is neither whim nor novelty but something enduring. Winifred looked down at their joined hands, his large and strong, hers smaller but equally capable in its way. And if, after such courtship, one of us decides this is impossible, then we part as friends, with honesty and respect. His thumbs brushed over her knuckles. But I don't believe that will happen. His confidence should have irritated her. Instead, she found it strangely compelling, not the entitled assurance of rank, but the quiet certainty of a man who knew his own mind. Lady Morton will likely dismiss me once she realizes your intentions are serious, Winifred said practically. A smile curved his mouth. I've anticipated that. My grandmother has already mentioned needing a companion. Despite herself, Winifred laughed. You've thought of everything. Not everything. His expression grew serious again. I cannot predict how your heart will respond. That remains the greatest uncertainty. Winifred took a deep breath, feeling as though she stood on the edge of a precipice. To step back meant safety, familiarity, the comfortable resignation of limited expectations. To step forward meant risk, vulnerability, the possibility of devastating pain, but also the chance of joy she had long ago resigned herself to never experiencing. Very well, she said finally. You may court me, Lord Isaiah. Though I make no promises beyond allowing myself to know you better. The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking through clouds, warm, brilliant, revealing aspects of him she had only glimpsed before. That is all I ask for now, Winifred. With formal correctness, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that was entirely proper and yet sent warmth coursing through her veins. Until tomorrow, then? Perhaps a drive in the park. Yes, she agreed, surprised by her own eagerness. Tomorrow. As he bowed and took his leave, Winifred remained in the garden, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched it, wondering if she had just made the bravest or most foolish decision of her life. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Winifred had experienced. True to his word, the Earl, Isaiah, as she had come to think of him in private moments, courted her with determined attention. They drove in the park, visited exhibitions at the Royal Academy, and took tea with his grandmother, who watched their developing attachment with undisguised satisfaction. Lady Morton, after her initial shock, had been surprisingly accommodating, likely seeing advantages in having connections to such an illustrious family. The children, especially Catherine, were enchanted by the Earl, who treated them with the same genuine interest he showed to everyone in Winifred's life. Society, however, was less accommodating. Whispers followed them at public gatherings. Ladies who had once fawned over the Earl now regarded him with confusion bordering on offense, while their gazes slid over Winifred as if trying to discover what hidden quality could have attracted such an eligible man. Lady Harewood was practically dissecting me with her eyes, Winifred murmured one afternoon as Isaiah escorted her through a sculpture exhibition. I fear she's disappointed not to find some secret beauty revealed upon closer inspection. Lady Harewood has 5 unmarried daughters and a gambling husband, he replied dismissively. Her disappointment stems from thwarted ambition, not aesthetic judgment. Winifred squeezed his arm gently. You needn't defend me against every perceived slight. I've developed quite a thick skin over the years. That you've had to do so offends me. His expression darkened briefly. But you're right. I should trust your resilience more. It was this willingness to listen, to adjust his thinking when presented with a valid perspective, that increasingly drew Winifred to him. Beneath his aristocratic reserve lay a mind that valued truth over convenience, substance over appearance. They debated literature, politics, and philosophy with equal vigor, neither yielding simply to please the other. Yet for all their growing closeness, something held Winifred back from fully embracing the possibility he offered. She found herself watching for signs that his interest might be waning, analyzing his expressions, measuring the time between their meetings, preparing herself for the inevitable moment when he would realize his mistake. The matter came to a head one rainy afternoon at his grandmother's house. The dowager had tactfully retired for a necessary nap, leaving them alone in the library. Thunder rolled outside as Winifred stood by the window, watching raindrops trace paths down the glass. You're unusually quiet today, Isaiah observed, coming to stand beside her. Am I? She replied absently. I was just thinking. About? She hesitated, then decided honesty was the only path forward. About us. About how this ends. His body tensed beside her. You decided it must end. No, but she turned to face him. Isaiah, be reasonable. We've been in this courtship for nearly 2 months. The novelty must surely be wearing thin. His expression hardened. Is that what you believe this is? A novelty? I don't know what to believe anymore. Frustration crept into her voice. You say you care for me, and I want to believe you. But every day, I wait for you to see what everyone else sees when they look at me. And what is that, exactly? There was an edge to his tone now. A plain, ordinary woman who is not remotely the kind of wife an earl should choose. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. A woman without beauty or fortune or social grace who would embarrass you at every turn. Enough. The single word, spoken with quiet authority, stopped her mid-sentence. Come with me. He took her hand firmly and led her to the far end of the library where a large mirror hung between 2 bookshelves. Positioning her before it, he stood behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "What do you see?" he asked, his reflection meeting her eyes in the glass. Winifred sighed. "Isaiah, what do you see?" he repeated more insistently. She looked at herself reluctantly, the simple blue dress, the practical hairstyle, the unremarkable features she had long ago accepted as her lot. "I see what I've always seen. Myself. Ordinary. Plain. That," he said quietly, "is not what I see." His hands tightened slightly on her shoulders. "I see a woman whose eyes change color with her mood, gray in thought, blue in laughter, stormy when provoked. I see lips that speak truth when flattery would be easier. I see a mind so quick and profound it humbles me daily." Winifred swallowed hard, unable to look away from his intense gaze in the mirror. "I see hands that create beauty from blank canvas, that gesture eloquently when you're passionate about a subject." His voice dropped lower. "I see a woman who has faced loss and disappointment without becoming bitter, who maintains her dignity without artifice, who sees the world with clarity and compassion." "Isaiah," she whispered, her throat tight with emotion. "Most of all," he continued, "I see the woman I love. Not as a novelty or a curiosity, but as the companion I want beside me for the rest of my life." Winifred's breath caught. It was the first time he had spoken of love directly, though his actions had implied it for weeks. "Turn around," he said softly. She did, finding herself mere inches from him, close enough to see the variations of gray in his eyes, the slight crease between his brows, the tension in his jaw that spoke of carefully controlled emotion. "I love you, Winifred Grantham," he stated plainly. "Not despite what you call your plainness, but because of the extraordinary woman that exists beneath society's shallow definitions of beauty and worth." Tears pricked at her eyes. "I don't know how to believe that. I want to, but then let me show you." And before she could respond, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, respectful and yet undeniably passionate. His hands cradled her face as though she were precious, his touch reverent. Winifred felt something crack inside her, the hard shell of protection she had built around her heart over 8 long years. When he drew back, his eyes searched hers. "Tell me you felt nothing," he challenged quietly. "Tell me this is merely novelty or convenience, and I will walk away." She couldn't. The truth had become undeniable. She loved him. Had perhaps loved him since that day in the garden when he had seen through her defenses to the wound beneath. "I can't tell you that," she whispered, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her palms. "Because I love you too, Isaiah. Despite every reason I've given myself not to." The smile that illuminated his face was worth every moment of doubt and fear. He drew her close, holding her against his heart. "Then marry me, Winifred. Be my wife, my partner, my countess." She pulled back slightly, one last doubt surfacing. "Society will never fully accept me in that role." "Society," he said with gentle mockery, "can go hang itself. We'll create our own society, one based on genuine worth rather than accident of birth or shallow appearance." His confidence was infectious, making her believe that perhaps they could indeed forge such a path together. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I will marry you, Isaiah Osborne." He kissed her again, more deeply this time, sealing their promise with a passion that banished the last of her doubts. In his arms, Winifred finally understood, love did not see through the eyes of society but through the heart of one who valued truth above all else. The wedding of the Earl of Ivington to Miss Winifred Grantham, former governess to the Morton family, was the talk of London for months. The ceremony was modest by aristocratic standards but elegant in its sincerity. The dowager countess beamed with approval throughout, occasionally shooting triumphant glances at scandalized members of the ton who had been too curious to decline their invitations. As Winifred stood before the altar in a gown of ivory silk, simple but exquisitely tailored, she caught her reflection in a nearby stained-glass window. The woman who looked back at her was transformed, not by the fine clothes or the prospect of a title, but by the certainty of being truly seen and valued for exactly who she was. Isaiah took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers as they spoke their vows. In that moment, Thomas Palmer's cruel words, too plain for love, finally lost their power. The truth had proven stronger, love saw with clearer eyes than society ever could. And when the Earl of Ivington kissed his bride before all of London society, the gossips who had whispered behind fans about his inexplicable choice fell silent. For in that kiss was a truth more powerful than convention, the certainty of two souls who had recognized in each other something genuine and enduring, beyond the reach of society's shallow judgment. As they walked back down the aisle together, Countess Winifred of Ivington held her head high. Plain or beautiful, rich or poor, such distinctions meant nothing compared to the greater truth she and Isaiah had discovered together, that true worth lay in the character of one's heart and the courage to see beyond the limitations others would impose. In that knowledge, they found a happiness that would sustain them through all the years to come.